At 8:45 in the evening, your eyes begin to close on their own, but you decide that going to bed now would be far too early. You keep watching television, answer one more message, and wait for a more respectable hour. By 10:30 that night, something strange has happened. You're tired, yet no longer sleepy. You finally turn off the light, lie awake, and wonder why the body that asked for sleep 2 hours ago now refuses to cooperate. That small evening reversal reveals more about bedtime after 70 than any universal number printed on a clock. The wrong bedtime is not always dramatically late. It can also be a bedtime chosen before your brain is ready, or one that changes so often that your internal clock cannot predict it. Sleep specialists, therefore, look at three things together: when genuine sleepiness appears, when you need to wake, and whether the hours between them produce a useful day. For many early rising adults after 70, the most workable bedtime falls somewhere between 9 and 10:30 at night. But that range is only a starting point. The correct half hour depends far more on your wake time and your biological sleepiness than on your age alone. That is why two people can both be 75, enter bed at 9:30 in the evening, and have completely different nights. One falls asleep comfortably and wakes refreshed. The other watches the clock, wakes repeatedly, and concludes that aging has destroyed sleep. The difference may begin with a distinction that is easy to miss. Feeling exhausted is not the same as being biologically ready to sleep. Exhaustion can come from pain, stress, illness, or a demanding day. Sleepiness is the brain's increasing inability to keep wakefulness stable. When true sleepiness appears, the eyes grow heavy, attention drifts, and the same page may be read twice without being absorbed. Ignore that signal repeatedly, and a temporary rise in evening alertness can make the next hour feel easier, even though the need for sleep has not disappeared. Go to bed before that signal arrives, however, and the result can be just as frustrating. A quiet room, a tired body, and a brain that is still defending wakefulness. So the best bedtime after 70 is neither the earliest hour you can choose, nor the latest hour you can tolerate. It is a repeatable window in which your internal clock and your accumulated need for sleep are finally pointing in the same direction. To calculate that window, begin with the morning rather than the night. The National Institute on Aging says older adults generally need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep and recommends keeping a regular sleep schedule. The CDC lists 7 to 8 hours for adults 65 and older, which shows why useful guidance is a range rather than one magic number. Choose the wake time your life requires, and that your body can maintain on most days, then work backward by the amount of sleep you genuinely appear to need. If you wake around 5:30 in the morning and function best with about 7.5 hours, your target for being asleep is close to 10 at night. Allowing a modest period to settle means entering bed between 9:30 and 9:45 in the evening may be reasonable, provided genuine sleepiness is already present. If you wake around 7 in the morning, forcing yourself into bed at 8:30 in the evening creates far more time in bed than your sleep system may be able to fill. Your likely window may instead begin around 10:30 or 11 at night, adjusted by what your body repeatedly does rather than by arithmetic alone. That gives us a practical estimate, but it does not yet explain why the window moves, disappears, or produces a broken night. Inside the brain, sleep timing is controlled by two systems that behave like separate hands guiding the same door. The first is sleep pressure. A chemical called adenosine gradually accumulates while you're awake and helps make sustained wakefulness more difficult. Sleep reduces that pressure. A long afternoon nap spends part of it early, which is why bedtime can arrive with less biological force behind it. The second system is circadian timing, a roughly 24-hour rhythm coordinated by a small region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This clock does not merely make you sleepy at night. It also produces an alerting signal during the day that helps oppose rising sleep pressure. Near your habitual evening, that alerting signal weakens, melatonin begins to rise under dim conditions, body temperature starts drifting downward, and sleep becomes easier to initiate. The cleanest sleep window appears when strong sleep pressure meets a falling circadian alerting signal. Go to bed too early, and the circadian system may still be defending wakefulness. Stay up beyond the natural descent, and light activity or a second wind may push the system back toward alertness. Aging changes this timing in several ways. Many older adults experience a phase advance, meaning the biological evening begins earlier than it once did. They become sleepy earlier, wake earlier, and discover that the late schedule they kept at 40 no longer fits the clock inside the brain. Age also tends to make sleep lighter and more fragmented, with less deep, slow-wave sleep and more opportunities to awaken during the night. Lighter sleep does not mean the body suddenly needs only 5 hours. It means noise, temperature, discomfort, breathing changes, and the need to urinate can pull the brain toward wakefulness more easily. The circadian signal itself may also become less pronounced, so the boundary between a clearly active day and a clearly sleepy evening can feel less obvious. That is one reason regular light, movement, and timing become more valuable with age. They help strengthen a signal that biology may no longer deliver as forcefully on its own. That makes placement more important, because adding extra hours in bed cannot always compensate for sleep scheduled against the internal rhythm. If this kind of explanation helps you understand what your body is doing, subscribe to Feynman's Body Code and tell me your age and country in the comments so I can see where this community is listening from. Now test your estimated bedtime against 4 signs that are more useful than the number displayed by a sleep tracker. The first is sleep latency, approximately how long it takes you to fall asleep after the light goes out. Falling asleep within roughly 15 to 30 minutes on most nights often suggests that bedtime is reasonably close to your biological window. Taking much longer may mean the bedtime is too early, the mind is highly activated, or another sleep problem is interfering. Falling asleep almost instantly every night can sound ideal, but it may also reflect significant sleep debt rather than perfect timing. The second sign is what happens after sleep begins. Brief awakenings can occur normally, especially with age. The more useful question is whether you return to sleep without a long struggle, or remain awake long enough for the night to split into separate pieces. The third sign is the end of the night. A suitable window should let you wake near the intended time, without repeatedly fighting an alarm, or lying awake for hours before dawn. The fourth sign is daytime function: alertness, mood, steadiness, memory, and the ability to remain awake during quiet activities. A bedtime is not successful merely because it produces 8 hours on a device. It must produce a person who can function safely the following day. Together, those 4 signs turn bedtime into a controlled experiment: reasonable sleep onset, manageable awakenings, a stable morning, and useful daytime energy. There is also a simple relationship worth noticing. Time in bed is not the same as time asleep. Spending 10 hours in bed to obtain 6 hours of broken sleep may look generous on the schedule, but it gives the brain 4 additional hours in which to learn that bed is a place for wakefulness. The goal is not to make the sleep opportunity as large as possible. It is to make it large enough for your need without stretching it far beyond what your present sleep system can use. Run that experiment in 5 steps. Select a consistent wake time, work backward by roughly 7 to 8 hours, and compare the estimate with the time genuine sleepiness normally appears. Protect the resulting window for at least 1 week, then judge it by the 4 signs rather than by one unusually good or bad night. If sleep routinely begins much later than planned, shift bedtime later by 15 minutes for several nights while keeping the morning stable. If strong sleepiness arrives earlier and you repeatedly push through it, move the transition earlier by 15 minutes and observe whether the night becomes more continuous. Small adjustments reveal cause and effect. Moving bedtime by 2 hours after every poor night only creates a new disturbance before the previous one can be understood. What makes this experiment work is not a complicated evening ritual. It is the strength of 3 signals spread across the entire day. The first signal is the morning anchor, and it begins with getting out of bed at a fairly consistent time. Rising at 6 in the morning on Monday, 8:30 in the morning on Tuesday, and 5:45 in the morning on Wednesday creates a form of internal travel without ever leaving home. The evening system has difficulty predicting when darkness should lead to sleep, because the biological morning keeps moving. Once you're up, outdoor light gives the eyes a far stronger timing message than ordinary indoor lighting. Light reaching specialized retinal cells is relayed to the central clock, helping coordinate the later timing of alertness, temperature, hormones, and sleepiness. This is why daylight soon after waking can matter even when the evening is the part of sleep that appears broken. You're not trying to stare at the sun or perform a precise ritual. You are giving the clock a recognizable beginning from which it can estimate the next biological night. A short walk, household activity, or gentle morning movement strengthens the message that this part of the cycle belongs to wakefulness. The goal is not to perform a perfect routine. It is to make morning unmistakably different from night. The second signal is sufficient wakefulness during the day, because sleep pressure must be earned rather than demanded from the clock. Walking, resistance exercise, social activity, and mentally engaging work all increase the contrast between waking and rest without requiring exhaustion. Someone who spends most of the day in dim indoor light, moves very little, and naps repeatedly may reach evening fatigued but without strong sleep pressure. That person may not need an earlier bedtime. The missing ingredient may be a clearer and more active day. Naps illustrate the problem particularly well. A brief early nap can restore alertness without necessarily damaging the night. A long nap late in the afternoon can transfer a substantial piece of nighttime sleep into daylight and make the planned bedtime biologically unrealistic. If falling asleep at night is difficult, record the timing and length of naps for 1 week before deciding that your body has forgotten how to sleep. The third signal is an evening that gradually stops competing with sleep. This does not require treating every screen as poisonous. Brightness, duration, distance, and the emotional intensity of the content all matter. A bright tablet held close to the face while reading upsetting news sends a different signal from a dim lamp across the room during a quiet conversation. During the final hour, reduce unnecessary brightness and choose activities that no longer demand rapid decisions, argument, or vigilance. A warm bath, quiet reading, gentle music, or preparing for the next morning can become a familiar bridge. But consistency matters more than the specific ritual. The contrast is what teaches the clock. Brighter and more active after waking, progressively dimmer and quieter as the expected sleep window approaches. Without that contrast, the brain receives a weak morning and an artificially bright night, then gets blamed for being uncertain about the time. Caffeine can weaken that bridge because it blocks adenosine receptors and masks part of the sleep pressure accumulated during the day. A cup that caused no obvious problem at 50 may become more noticeable later as clearance, medication, and health conditions change. If sleep onset is difficult, move caffeine earlier for 1 week and observe the result instead of changing several habits at once. Alcohol creates the opposite illusion. It may accelerate the first descent while fragmenting the later night and worsening snoring, reflux, balance, or sleep apnea. Large meals can aggravate discomfort, while excessive late fluid can increase bathroom awakenings, so the useful adjustment is often timing rather than severe restriction. These three signals explain why bedtime begins in the morning, builds through the day, and becomes visible only when the evening stops concealing it. They also explain the two wrong bedtime patterns that appear most often after 70. The first is entering bed too early out of fear that there will not be enough sleep. You lie down at 8 in the evening, remain in bed until 7 in the morning, and expect the sleep system to produce 11 continuous hours simply because the opportunity exists. If your body currently produces 7 hours of actual sleep, the remaining 4 become available for waking, worrying, and checking the clock. Over time, the bed itself can become associated with calculation and frustration instead of rapid descent into sleep. The second pattern is pushing past genuine sleepiness, because an early bedtime feels like surrendering part of the evening. The first wave passes, brighter light and activity continue, and the person reaches bed later, but not necessarily better prepared for stable sleep. The internal clock may still produce the old early morning, shortening the night instead of moving it later. This is why the 8:45 evening signal from the beginning matters. It may represent the opening of a real window rather than weakness, laziness, or proof that you are becoming old. The answer is not to jump into bed after one yawn. Notice whether the same cluster of heavy eyes, drifting attention, and reduced concentration appears at a similar time across several evenings. When it does, begin lowering stimulation before that cluster, and enter bed when staying awake starts to require effort. If you're not sleepy at the planned time, forcing sleep usually makes the bed more frustrating. Keep the light low, leave the clock alone, and continue a quiet activity until drowsiness returns. Repeatedly checking the time turns a normal awakening into a performance test, and the calculation that only 4 hours remain can activate the alerting system you're trying to quiet. Judge the pattern the following morning and across the week, not minute by minute in the dark. A simple sleep diary makes that pattern visible. Record bedtime, estimated sleep onset, major awakenings, final wake time, naps, caffeine, and daytime sleepiness for 7 to 14 days. Do not chase perfect accuracy. You are looking for repeated relationships that memory tends to blur. Entering bed at 9 at night, but rarely sleeping before 10-15 points toward a window that currently begins later. Becoming strongly sleepy at 9:15 in the evening, pushing to 11 at night, and still waking at 5:30 in the morning points in the opposite direction. The diary converts both situations from a personal failure into information that can guide the next 15-minute adjustment. There is one boundary the experiment cannot cross. Timing will not correct a disorder that repeatedly interrupts sleep. Loud snoring, witness breathing pauses, choking awakenings, morning headaches, or severe daytime sleepiness deserve medical assessment because an earlier bedtime cannot reopen a collapsing airway. Persistent urges to move the legs, significant pain, reflux, coughing, urinary problems, mood changes, and medication effects can also fragment sleep independently of the clock. Do not stop prescribed medication on your own. Bring the diary to a clinician and ask whether timing, dosage, interactions, or an underlying condition may be involved. Persistent insomnia may respond to cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, while sleeping pills and melatonin require more caution in older adults because dose, timing, interactions, falls, and next-day impairment matter. The useful question is therefore not only, what time should I go to bed? It is also, what is preventing the sleep window from working when I reach it? Once those interruptions have been considered, the recommendation becomes straightforward. Start from a stable wake time, allow roughly 7 to 9 hours according to your actual need, and look for the evening period when genuine sleepiness repeatedly appears. For someone waking at 5:30 in the morning, the experiment may begin near 9:30 or 10 at night. For someone waking at 7 in the morning, it may begin closer to 10:30 or 11 at night. Neither person is more disciplined. Their biological clocks and morning obligations simply place the same process at different hours. This is why copying a spouse's bedtime can fail, even when both people are the same age and sleep in the same room. Chronotype, light exposure, activity, medication, health conditions, and required wake time can create different windows under the same roof. Going to bed together may be socially pleasant, but the brain cannot negotiate its sleep pressure with the clock on the nightstand. The real recommendation from sleep science is more useful than one dramatic universal hour. After 70, many people naturally shift earlier, and a window between about 9 and 10:30 at night often works when morning rise time is also early. But the deeper rule is consistency plus alignment. Enough opportunity for sleep, placed where the internal clock is prepared to use it. Tonight, notice the first dependable signs of genuine sleepiness instead of waiting for the hour you believe an adult is supposed to choose. Tomorrow morning, rise near the same time. Seek daylight, and record what actually happened rather than what you hoped would happen. Within a week, that repeated response will tell you more than any isolated night or universal bedtime printed on the internet. At 8:45 in the evening, when the eyes become heavy and attention begins to drift, you may no longer see an inconvenient interruption to the evening. You may recognize the opening of a biological window that has been quietly arriving at the same time all along.